225 million. That's how many devices Apple sold of the iPhone 6 series. You know, that iPhone 6. This is the story of one of, if not the best-selling pieces of technology of all time, and how Apple seemed to break records with one of its most controversial gadgets ever. Up until September 2014, Apple had sold almost exclusively small smartphones, from the original all the way up to the iPhone 5 and the 5S, which saw marginal screen size jumps into a taller form factor, but not much else. These were small phones. For reference, 2012 and 2013 saw Samsung's Galaxy S3 and S4 with near enough 5-inch displays, whilst Apple was still selling devices with 4-inch screens. I remember hearing my iPhone-wielding friends say that they would never buy a phone with such a huge screen as the 4.7-inch one I had on my Galaxy Nexus. The early 2010s homed an era many describe as the build quality revolution, where once flimsy plastic, small and toy-like devices were once commonplace, companies like HTC and LG took matters into their own hands to provide high-end, robust chassis made of aluminium, much like Apple's build materials but on a much larger scale. This is where we saw the advent of the legendary HTC One series and the emergence of interesting designs like the LG Nexus 4. The Android space was seeing drastic change to the most recognizable designs. By the way, if you're still watching, please subscribe, it really helps the channel out. When September 2014 rolled around and Apple held its iconic keynote, it would launch a couple of phones that would dwarf what came before them. The iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6 Plus were appreciably ginormous compared to the iPhone 5. They were the biggest change to the iPhone, well, since the line's inception, but it wasn't exactly smooth sailing with these devices. The biggest issue plaguing these devices, in particular the Plus model, was a weak chassis. There were multiple reports of phones bending when users had them in their back pockets of their jeans, and of course Lou's deliberate phone bending antics went viral and, well, sent his channel supernova, not only informing prospective buyers that this was an issue, but setting headlines and putting the incident on blast for the world to see. Though this was clearly a catastrophic design flaw, it wouldn't be the only problem surrounding the iPhone 6 series, with touch disease coming in to stir the pot just some more. Some users started reporting that their touchscreens would become either unresponsive or start glitching out and tapping on things even when they aren't even touching their phone. No, this wasn't any kind of software virus, but instead a hardware problem with the digitizer that recognizes the touch signals. I personally had this problem with my iPhone 6 and was understandably absolutely fuming when the phone I'd spent a good amount of money on, I was quite a bit younger, money was harder to come by, spent a decent wedge on this smartphone and it started glitching out on me when there was seemingly no physical damage to the device. I'd kept that phone in the case its entire life and many other users had this problem. The iPhone 6 was not exactly perfect. Reviews lamented its lack of software optimization to make use of these larger displays. I saw one review that said its camera bump was really annoying, which is kind of hilarious when you think about it these days. And actually the standard 6's battery life was really never deemed a big enough jump considering the difference in physical size between the 5S and the 6, negating one of the typical benefits of a larger smartphone. And yet, despite all of these issues, the iPhone 6 is one of, if not the, best-selling consumer electronic of all time, handily beating some absolutely legendary pieces of tech, such as the PlayStation 2, the Nintendo Wii, the iPhone 5S even, or the Galaxy S4. 1 in 33 people statistically had an iPhone 6, which is absolutely mind-bending. It's such a colossal sales figure that we might not ever top that again. To put this into perspective though, in 2023, Toyota, the world's largest car manufacturer, had reached a total 300 million total cars produced in the first 88 years of making cars. That's new models, new trims, an entire almost century of evolution, and yet Apple had sold almost that many in just 2 years. 2. That is insane. It's pretty hard to ignore the cultural impact that Apple had been building and having in the decades leading up to the iPhone 6. The iPod, the Mac, the iPad, the iPhone itself, of course. They were everywhere, and the company had been leading the way, inspiring other manufacturers to create unique, in interesting devices. But the iPhone 6 series, well, it wasn't exactly revolutionary, just kind of made the iPhone bigger. Phones like the HTC One created interesting and unique camera setups, had stereo front-firing speakers, and many phones of this size at the time were making better use of the larger canvas, with more information density in the software menus, and also cramming in extra stuff like, I don't know, a bigger battery. And yet the iPhone 6 and the 6 Plus didn't do much of that, but outsold everything. In fact, I'd even say that the iPhone X had the bigger impact on the world's smartphones in terms of what it did for design, its setting trends, feature cutting, and taking a new approach. But that phone didn't sell nearly as well as the iPhone 6, which is baffling. It's funny, do you remember the HTC One A9, the Android phone that looks suspiciously similar to the iPhone of that year from the back? Well, the company was pressed on this uncanny resemblance by Want China Times. HTC North Asia president Jack Tong claims that they weren't copying, and in fact Apple was copying HTC with the same antenna line on the back, which is hilarious. The iPhone 6s greatly improved on the more popular 6, but sold considerably less. I mean, still a very potent 174 million models. It had a stiffer frame to resist the bending, a slightly thicker profile to accommodate this. Its camera was substantially better, with the ability to shoot Ultra HD 4K 30p video. It used faster NVMe storage. It even had a pressure sensitive screen for additional functionality. It was the far better of these two phones, though aside from that rose gold variant, you'd be hard pressed to tell them apart visually. And also, alongside the iPhone 6's development, HTC launched its improved HTC One M8, which made great progress on its incredible predecessor. It had a larger display, stereo front-firing speakers, a much larger battery, and a more interesting camera than the iPhone 6. I would actually say that that phone was more interesting than this one. I did a full video on Android Police about this, so you should check that out if you want to hear more about that. But despite the HTC One M8 feeling so legendary and being held in such high regard, just simply could not compete with the iPhone 6 in sales numbers, which is kind of insane. It's been just over 10 years since Apple launched this device, and just over 8 since the firm stopped making it. The iPhone 6 series is one seriously baffling case that I'm not sure we'll ever truly understand. We've since had some absolute bangers, not only from other brands of course, but from Apple themselves. The 11 was fantastic, the 13 mini was incredible, the 14 Pro was elite, and you know what? The 16 series? Absolutely phenomenal. And though I am an Android man, probably will always be, I have no problem calling the iPhone one of the best phone series of all time, with some of the best all-rounders that you could ever buy. The iPhone 6 with its touch disease, bend gate, battery life woes didn't stop people buying them, even though maybe it should have. What the 6 also did though is introduce the mainstream to big phones and make it normal to carry around devices the size that we carry around today. So those of you who absolutely hate large smartphones can thank Apple for introducing the world to that. This is not one of the best phones of all time. It's not even top 5 for me. And yet Apple managed to persuade almost 250 million people to buy one. And that's pretty impressive. That's how Apple scammed the world, and no one seemed to notice.